Apple cider vinegar and honey off the cone do a lot of good for a simple man's soul. Take it hot, take it right off the stove. Add a little liquor, it'll cure a little cold.
Everything in that intro was shot using this motorized slider from Zeapon. I have been wanting a motorized slider ever since the day I picked up one of these manual sliders. Maybe it's just me, but I could never get perfectly smooth, steady shots using one of these. So when Zeapon reached out and asked if I'd be interested in reviewing one of their motorized sliders, I enthusiastically accepted their offer. Now, in full disclosure, Zeapon provided me with the slider, but like all other product videos that I post, Zeapon did not have any editorial input on this video, nor have they seen this video prior to being published. In this video, I'm going to share with you everything you need to know about the Zeapon Micro 2, how it works, how to set it up, and the creative things that you can do with it. My name is Todd Dominey. I'm a photographer, a designer, and I make videos here on YouTube about photography, photo and video gear, and post-processing. If you're short on time and you just want to know whether the Zeapon Micro 2 is worth purchasing, I will save you the time. Overall, the short answer is yes. I think the Zeapon Micro 2 is a fantastic motorized slider for the money. However, there's a lot more to cover, both positive and a few small negative things, which I'll review in this video. All right, everyone, let's begin with the basics. So this slider is the Motorized Micro 2, which at the time of this video is the smallest motorized slider that Zeapon offers. The motorized slider weighs 3 pounds or 1.36 kilograms and has a compact footprint of 16 inches or 40 centimeters in length. This makes the Micro 2 just the right length for carry-on backpacks like this Low Pro 450. The carrying capacity up here on top, how much you can mount onto the slider, is 10 pounds or 4.5 kilograms. The construction of the Micro 2 is a mix of aircraft-grade aluminum alloy, stainless steel, and ABS composite, which you can definitely feel both in the weight and in the overall fit and finish of its construction. At the back of the slider is the motor. The motor runs on standard Sony MPF batteries. Supported MPF batteries include the F550, which is what I have here, the F750, and the F970. Now, I used an F550 battery and tested how long the slider could continually run on a loop carrying a ball head, a DSLR, and a heavy lens, and I got around 6 hours of runtime, and that's with the slider just continually running on a loop back and forth. On the side of the motor is the power button, which obviously turns the slider on and off, and it changes the speed from slow to medium to fast. On top of the motor are 2 arrow buttons. You just simply press and hold the arrow buttons, and the slider moves back and forth at the speed currently assigned by the power button. Next, let's talk about mounting the slider. The Zeapon Micro 2 needs to be mounted to something in order to actually slide. In other words, you can't just take the motorized Micro 2 out of a box and put it on a table. To mount the slider, there's a 3/8 of an inch female thread on the bottom of this center piece here. This allows you to mount the slider directly to a tripod, or in this case here, a quick release plate. If you would rather attach the slider to a ball head or a fluid video head, you can use the provided 3/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch adapter to mount a plate. On top where the camera is mounted is a 1/4 inch thread. Now, because this is a 1/4 inch thread, you could just mount the camera directly to that. But I think in my experience from using this, you will have better results overall and just more control over the camera by first mounting a ball head. What's unique about the Zeapon Micro 2 is that its rails are 13 inches or 33 centimeters in length, but the travel distance of the camera, how far it's able to move left and right, is 21 inches or 53 centimeters, which mathematically doesn't make sense, right? I mean, how can the camera travel further than the length of the slider? Well, because this slider rather ingeniously moves with the camera. It's kind of similar to like adding tracks in front of a moving train, because as the camera moves, the rails slide underneath in the same direction that the camera is moving. This effectively lengthens your shot an extra 8 inches, making footage look like it was captured using a longer slider. Additionally, by moving the rails with the camera, it means then that the camera can move forward and backward over the rails, pointing towards the rails down here at the end, and the rails will never get in your shot. Generally speaking, there are 4 main styles of movement. There's forward and backward, like I just talked about. There's side to side with the camera looking out this way. There's also up and down because you can mount the slider vertically, and you can also position the slider at an angle to get an incline shot. So to make the camera start sliding, there are 2 ways to do it. You can either use the controls that are here on the motor, or you can use the Zeapon mobile app for iOS and Android, which I'll be getting to here in just a second. So the first thing to do is just come over here to the power button and make sure that the speed is where you want it. You then just use the arrow keys and you can move the slider back and forth like this. Just keep the button pressed down and the camera will smoothly move from one end of the slider to the other. Now, if you want to do something a little more sophisticated than that, what you can do is set waypoints so that the camera will start at a particular position and then stop at another position and then loop that behavior and then go back and continue to move back and forth. To do that, what you do is just get the camera where you want. Let's just call that point A. Then you come over here to the power button and you double click on it and you'll hear 1 beep. Then you use the arrow buttons again and you move it to point B. Come back to the power button. Now you hold down the forward button, the forward arrow on the top of the motor, and then click the power button. And then you'll notice that it's now sliding from the point A to point B, and then it just continues to repeat this motion at the speed we have assigned. To stop it from moving, you just hold down the front arrow button and then press power and it'll stop. When you set A and B waypoints, the forward and backward buttons here on top of the motor will no longer function and you may think there's something wrong. What you need to do is you have to return these buttons back to their default behavior, which is just manually moving the camera back and forth. So you just press and hold on the 2 arrow buttons. The sequence has been cleared, there's no more waypoints, and you're able to then manually move the camera again. All right, now let's take a look at the Zeapon mobile app for iOS and Android. Now, when you launch the Zeapon mobile app, the first screen you will come to is Scan Devices. The slider connects to your mobile device via Bluetooth, and you should see it in the list here. So you just tap on the slider, and then within a couple of seconds, you come to this interface here. You will see that there are 2 tabs at the top. There's a tab for video and a tab for time-lapse. Now, at the top of the video screen, you will see this large, rather impressive looking circular interface that, seems to communicate that you have loads of control over what's going on with the slider. But unfortunately, looks can be a little deceiving because 3 out of the 4 sliders here are currently disabled. Only one of them works, and that's the one at the top for slider. Now, I assume that means that these other controls will be enabled once Zeapon manufactures a specialized Zeapon ball head, but at the time of this video at least, that does not exist. I did reach out to Zeapon to inquire about these other controls and to ask, what their future plans were. So if I do hear some kind of answer from Zeapon on this, I will pin a comment below. All right, so let's look at just some basic sliding. If you just move it all the way to the left, then the slider moves all the way to the left. Same thing all the way to the right, which is fine for just basic movement. But as I demonstrated earlier with the buttons on the motor, you have the ability to set waypoints as well. So let me just demonstrate this for you. So what you do is just get your camera into its starting position wherever you want its movement to start. Then you double tap on number 1, and that number 1 will turn red, and that means that you've assigned a waypoint. And then slide the camera as far as you want. Let's just leave it about there. That looks good. And then double tap on number 2, and you'll notice that then you get this yellow kind of rectangle down here at the bottom. Now, if you want to make it faster, you just raise the bar, and obviously that's cutting down on the length of time. And if you want to make it slower, you just pull it back down. But let's say you want to loop that motion. All you have to do is just tap the loop button up here and enable it, and then hit play. And then the camera will continuously move from point A to point B, or waypoint 1 to waypoint 2. All right, so now let's take a look at the time-lapse mode. Now, to be honest, time-lapse is a rather kind of complicated topic, which could be a video unto itself. There's a lot of detail that I could go into, but I really don't want to bog down the video in this one part. So let me just quickly explain the basics of how it works. So the first thing you'll notice here is that I now have the camera connected to the motor using a shutter release cable. Now, when you set up a time lapse, the very first thing you want to do is set a fixed shutter speed on your camera. You want it to be in either manual or shutter priority. You can't use aperture priority. My camera is currently set to 1/5 of a second. So I'm going to come up here to exposure, which, by the way, could be labeled better. I mean, they should just say shutter speed here. I'm not sure why they don't. Now, interval time is how long the slider will wait, how long it pauses between firing the shutter, between each photo. What the time-lapse mode here offers is this little scene horizontal slider where you have options for night, clouds, stars, just basically these are presets for different interval times. So I'm just going to use the interval time of 3 seconds, which is the night preset. And now at this point, it may not be entirely clear what you're supposed to do next. At least it wasn't entirely clear to me, but here's what you need to do. You need to set the waypoints for how the camera is going to move for the time lapse, where the time lapse should start and where it should end. But there isn't really a way to move the camera in this interface. So what you have to do is you have to tap back to video, come back to time lapse, and now you'll see that those waypoints are now in the time lapse view. Now that the Zeapon knows how far it's going to be moving between waypoints, it's able to calculate how many photos are going to be shot. So up here at the top where it says number next to PCS, which I guess they mean to be an acronym for pictures. So it's going to shoot 176 pictures between waypoint 1 and waypoint 2. And as this white timer up here above the play button communicates, it's going to take 11 minutes and 44 seconds for that time lapse to complete. So you kind of set this to however long you want the time lapse to be, like how long you want the finished actual time lapse to be once it's all compiled and created. The last thing that we need to do is actually start the time lapse. So to do that, you tap on the camera icon. As you can hear, the camera is now firing and it's creating a time lapse, 1/5 of a second shutter speed, and interval of 3 seconds between each one. Now, something important to know if you are an experienced time-lapse photographer is the fact that once the time-lapse mode begins, it's not possible to stop and start, or rather to pause the time-lapse in between the waypoints. And let me just turn this off just so I don't have this thing clicking the whole time. When you turn it off, and actually this is a good opportunity to demonstrate this, if you turn off the time-lapse and then re-engage it, you probably can't see from there, but I'll tell you that it moved back to waypoint 1 and is now starting to create the time lapse again. So why is this notable? Well, because if during the time lapse, if you are shooting a scene where the lighting conditions are changing, like if you're shooting from like day to night or night to day, then you will likely need to be ramping your ISO or your aperture on the camera to compensate for how bright and dark it gets, because it'll be kind of hard to use fixed values all the way through if lighting conditions are changing. So what I found I had to do was, like, it would take a photo and then I would just get in there really quick, make a change, and then let go to make sure I didn't bump it or interrupt the movement in any way. Next, a few creative tips. So as I said earlier at the beginning of this video, this was actually my first experience using a motorized slider. But in the time I spent with the Zeapon, I learned a few important things. Tip number 1, motion is very hard to see when your subject is far away. The more distant your subject, the longer your rails have to be. So for a compact slider like the Zeapon Micro 2, which has a camera travel distance of 21 inches, you really need to include foreground elements in your composition. By including foreground elements, it creates a parallax effect in your footage where elements close to the camera appear to be moving faster than the background. Second tip, visualize your shot first, holding the camera in your hand. Move the camera back and forth in front of you as if it were attached to a slider to figure out how high or low the camera needs to be mounted, and also where your starting and where your start point and your end point should be. This will save you a lot of wasted time and effort because setting up the slider on top of the tripod and then moving everything around and getting everything just so, it takes time. The third tip is to use the looping function. Now, this was actually one of my favorite features on the Zeapon, for then I could loop motion between waypoints over and over again, and that would just keep the camera recording, keep the camera moving the entire time. And then later, I could take all of that footage and then just go in and edit out the best part. Creative tip number 4, and this repeats something I talked about earlier, and that is to consider picking up some quick release plates if you don't already own them. The reason these are so helpful is because then you can attach one plate to the bottom of the Zeapon. Then when you have your camera and everything else mounted on top of that, then you are able to just pick up the Zeapon. You can just pick up your whole rig, move it off of one tripod, and then move it onto a smaller tripod, and then back again. All right, everyone, some final thoughts on the Zeapon Motorized Micro 2. I mean, overall, I just think it's a fantastic slider. I have had so much fun using this the past couple of weeks. I've learned so much using it. I think the build quality is great. I never had any trouble connecting to it over Bluetooth with the mobile app, and I just love its small size and that long camera travel distance. For creating time-lapse videos, I think it's a good slider, but not great. There's the aforementioned issue with not being able to pause time lapses once they start, in addition to a lack of additional hardware to rotate, pan, and tilt the camera, which is something that professional time-lapse creators would want. For basic time-lapse use though, the Zeapon works fine, and it'll help make an average time-lapse look just a bit more dynamic and cinematic. By the way, if you happen to own this slider and you have some feedback on it that you would care to share, I would love to hear your feedback and your comments. Please feel free to leave them below. Thanks again to Zeapon for sending me a motorized slider. I am so happy to have one and I'm so enjoying it. And I definitely plan on using this more in the future in my future videos. If you're interested in picking up a Zeapon Micro 2 for yourself, there is a link to purchase one down below in the description. In full disclosure, that is an affiliate link, which means that I'll earn a little bit of referral credit if you do purchase it through me, which obviously I would greatly appreciate it because it goes towards supporting the content on this channel. I sincerely hope, by the way, that you're doing well and that you're keeping your sanity during this crazy time. I mean, it's just feels like such a weird time in the world right now, and I know for me personally, I'm just trying to take advantage of this time, trying to develop new skills, trying to learn new things, and trying to maintain that creative spirit, and trying to just keep that energy alive, even though I'm not able to be out in the world and to be doing the kind of landscape photography work that I normally love to do. At least I'm able to fill that time and to take advantage of it and to be doing new things, like using a motorized slider for the first time. So that's it, everyone. Thanks so much. I'll see you next week.